Good. Welcome everybody here in Wageningen and elsewhere from the world. Well, today is World Animal Day. And besides giving extra treats to our pets, it may also be a good day to stand still with an animal disease that has been having a heavy burden on many farming systems in the world, called foot and mouth disease. And today we're also in the happy occasion that Thanicha Chanchaidechachai did defend her thesis this morning. And for all of you that are curious, she passed. So we have a young doctor in our midst, and she did her thesis on foot and mouth disease. Well, given the fact that we have a young doctor who worked for almost 4 years on this very interesting topic, and also from an interesting perspective, combining epidemiology and economics, and given the fact that there is a committee of evaluation committee, opponents we call them in the Netherlands, that are well from the UK, and unfortunately the flight of Thibaut Provière, well, he had to fly back much earlier because of a cancellation, so he can't present. He is on his way to Schiphol Airport now, but still there's quite some interesting people around to make a nice symposium about foot and mouth disease. And we gave it the title Epidemiological and Economic Challenges. And we have a program for you this afternoon that is, well, of course, the young doctor has to present. And, well, I think she's going to present something on what we think is one of the more interesting topics from her thesis, besides all the other good stuff that she did about compliance to measures. But we have, and of course she's a keynote presenter because of that. We have Jonathan Rushton from the UK, University of Liverpool, who's a second keynote. And we have after the break 4 smaller presentations on, well, case studies from different countries. Dr. Chaidate Inchaisri from Thailand is here as well. And nice that you're here. He's presenting with a Thai perspective. We have Victoria. Last name, yeah, here, yeah, from Uruguay, well, who is at a different status of eradication, also given the Uruguayan perspective. And we have Bart from the Borne, who had a student from Indonesia, but a student went back to Indonesia, so he can't present himself, but about the recent Indonesian outbreak, of which they have quite some interesting data. And besides a bit of a socio-economic perspective on it, which I will provide. So an interesting program, and we are happy that we're here with quite a nice audience in Wageningen, but even a much larger audience is online. We have been debating a little bit for the people online, well, how we do that in discussions, and we decided, having hybrid discussions where we don't have the equipment here for that, and nor the people, but that we, if you have questions, you may ask them in the chat. And at the moment when there is a question and answer session, then we will try to summarize those and also address them. And that's especially at the end of the symposium where we have some time dedicated for discussion. Well, I'll leave it with that. The first speaker, I'm very happy to have him here, is Jonathan Rushton, University of Liverpool, and well, very active in what's called the global burden of animal disease, GBAT. And yeah, well, there's no better person to introduce us all in the burden of foot and mouth disease. If you put this on, then I will.
I'll let you do that. Yeah. Speak to me.
The mouse is a bit slow. Where is it?
Yeah, perfect.
Well, I have to change this. That does this automatically. Again, slow.
Perfect. Great. First of all, thank you, Henk, for inviting me to today, and thank you Dr. Thanicha. I won't try and pronounce your last name because I'll get it wrong. But Anne, you did a great job today with your thesis defense, and it was a pleasure to actually look through your work. So Henk, thanks so much. I want to spend a little bit of time describing the global burden of animal diseases, but put a context around foot and mouth disease. Before I begin, I want to sort of share with you where I come from in this kind of journey. This chart was done by Will Houston, who's a great scientist, very kind of eminent person. And he put together a chart with all the figures that were sort of bounding around about the impact of diseases. And I've challenged him about it because when you look at the data behind it, none of it's actually based on published work. So it's never been formally published, but it's regularly used in terms of having advocacy work about influencing policy and moving things forward. And I think that's a real problem for us. So we're actually using what people call economics in a sense of kind of stating cases without actually doing proper science in the background. Now, why is that important? Well, part of my career in terms of foot and mouth disease was spent in South America, and this is a woman that I met probably nearly 20 years ago now. She was struggling to make ends meet with a small sheep flock, a family that was dependent on her. So she was actually living on the margins, and the work I was doing in Bolivia was about foot and mouth disease surveillance. And when you start asking questions about what was Juanita Perez up to in that kind of structure, you know, do we actually really know what health technologies she's got access to? Who's providing them? What are her key animal health problems? Does her demand for animal health technologies actually match by supply? And how can we actually sort of change that picture? And when you start looking at this, and this is made up data, so just be careful about quoting this, but if you imagine that her problems are made up through infectious disease issues, non-infectious disease issues, injuries and accidents within that flock, foot and mouth disease occupied quite a small component of her challenges. In fact, I would always say they were less important than anything else. And that was quite common across large swathes of Bolivia. So we were working on foot and mouth disease, but it simply was not an issue that was worth looking at from a farmer perspective. And yet, I'm very passionate about foot and mouth disease, so I think it is important. Foot and mouth disease has global importance, and it's multifactorial. So we all know it affects many different species. It influences how we produce and process livestock. Probably its biggest influence is actually we use it as a trade barrier across the world. And we continue to do that, even though we know that science doesn't really match some of the things that we actually do. And therefore, it shapes resource allocation for animal health in many different contexts. And because of this, every person in this room is to some degree affected by FMD. We're in countries in Europe that are free, have been free for probably the best part of 3 or 4 decades. I know we've had outbreaks, but they've been controlled quite rapidly. And we benefit from that freedom in terms of our association with international trade markets. That's not the same for many countries in Africa. It hasn't been the same in many parts of South America until recently. But I'd say that FMD is very much a food system problem. It's not a problem just about the animals that we're actually looking at. Now, going back probably now nearly 15 years, when I was first involved in looking at this for FAO and what was then OIE, there were no actual studies of estimating the global socioeconomic impact of FMD. And the importance of those kinds of studies for me are that if you have that kind of information, then you can start to imagine where resources are being used on disease management, where losses are actually occurring, and where resource allocation can actually be used. And there was nothing really pulled together in a systematic way in terms of thinking about that more carefully. I want to go through a little bit about what we did in that foot and mouth disease work and then sort of move on to the Global Burden of Animal Disease Programme before coming back with a few reflections. So our starting point was, well, what frameworks do we have for actually assessing disease burdens? And this is very much work that I've kind of stolen and copied from people like John McInerney. So when we think about disease burdens, we start immediately to think about when animals die or people die, worse still, whether animals are actually not doing very well, poorly developed, etc. These kinds of issues are all kind of visible losses that are quickly detected and actually reported. Now, any veterinary system or animal health system or farmers, if these things start to occur, then our first reaction is to try and do something about it. But we tend to get very focused on just the estimation of this part here. But of course, we don't just stay there. We actually start to do something. We actually start to spend money and we react to the presence of disease. So we start to do things like vaccination, or we start to do things like controlling movement, possibly applying control measures with regards culling animals, etc. So that's a sort of balance in terms of economic terms, where every time we spend euros here, we're anticipating that we'll actually avert some losses on this side. There are other issues that tend to occur that are less obvious, the invisible losses. And these are also captured in kind of FMD, the things like fertility problems that can be kind of long-term and actually not immediately obvious in terms of the impact of a disease. And of course, there are other things we do that actually mean that we lose revenue, and that's about denying people access to markets. And of course, if we have really frequent levels of disease incursions, people will start to use suboptimal technologies in terms of production itself. So there's a range of things there that are kind of important. And what I kind of emphasize as we go through this is that this is actually should be an economic relationship. So we have the impact caused by the disease or the health problem itself on the actual livestock. And then we have the impact caused by our own reaction to that problem. And quite often this is a balance. So if you look at John McInerney's work going back to the 1980s, 1990s, he kind of captured the imagination of some economists in terms of thinking about this from a technical relationship between expenditure and loss. Okay, and we can represent this in terms of conceptual frameworks, but we can also collect data around this. And we can add in here isocost lines to actually try and identify optimal points of control. So in this particular relationship, obviously, if you don't spend any money, there's no control, but you're accepting there's actually quite a high level of loss. We've also got a situation where you might want to move towards eradication. And if we look at this particular representation of that relationship between health loss and expenditure, we can identify an optimal point of control. Now, why is that important? Well, if we accept this optimal point of control from an economic perspective, then it means we're not eradicating disease. We're actually living with it. And if we're trying to push the boundary in this direction, then it does require public policy interventions or some bigger group in society. It might be private companies, but it can't be done solely on the basis of thinking that farmers themselves will do that on their own. Now, that relationship between expenditure and reaction is actually driven by how we value things in society. And the health losses are about changes in biomass of people and of animals. Yeah. So the quantity issue is about how many human lives we save or animal lives we save. Quality will be about healthier animals or healthier people. And then there will be an issue about efficiency of production, which is obviously much more important in a livestock sense. And I would argue that if we accept that there's an important economic relationship here, then changes in biomass actually need to be calculated and then valued in that structure. There's also an issue about change of technology. So this line here is not set by some kind of general biological rule. We're constantly pushing it in different directions. So if we have disease management with no technology, you can see that even if we start to spend more money as we go this way, we're not going to have much change in terms of that loss of production. But what happens if we actually shift the technology? Well, it should move that line further down, making the optimal point of control perhaps further in this area, spending more money, but actually getting more averted losses. And the example I use quite frequently for this is that the FMD vaccines in South America were changed in the 1990s. So we improved the adjuvant that was actually used. We created trivalent vaccines. And suddenly we had animals that were covered with a wider range of serotypes, and also had a longer immunity level. And if you look at control of FMD in South America, it's pretty tightly linked with that shift of technology and improvement of control. How do we get to that kind of shift of technology? Well, sometimes it's about investing in research, but it can also be about improving the capacities of the veterinary system, or about educating people in general, educating our farmers. And again, that requires public funding. It requires a kind of fixed cost investment. And if you look at the work of the economist Clem Tisdale, who's sadly no longer with us, he looked at this in Thailand back in the 1990s, I think, and actually came up with the need to actually have really strong fixed costs investments of our veterinary system to bolt on the kind of vaccination programs that Dr. Anna's explored more recently. So health costs here need to be thought of in terms of a mix of fixed costs and variable costs to think overall about that expenditure pattern. Again, why is that important? Well, I'm delighted that you've done your PhD. So you're part of that fixed cost investment in Thailand. So you need to go home and tell people how to do things better. But it's part of that building human capacities in terms of how we operate into the future. So that's a kind of more general framework. It's very much built around a couple of economists who thought about this probably 4 decades ago, John McInerney followed by Clem Tisdale. If you start to apply that to FMD impacts, and this is what Theo Knight-Jones and myself did back in 2002, then you can see we can start to think about which bits are we looking at with FMD. So loss of milk production, loss of draft power, lower weight gains, dead animals, a range of things on this side in terms of invisible losses with fertility issues, and then a whole range of things on that indirect, the expenditure issues with vaccine development, vaccine delivery, and also the denied access to markets. And we tried to put some values around that. What I'd honestly say is that, whoops, I need to go backwards rather than forwards. Some aspects here we could sort of model. Some aspects here had some data, but this work here was very difficult to actually get any kind of data from. And we were doing this study as a consultancy. It wasn't a piece of research, but we did publish a paper where we made estimations that on an annual basis, FMD was having an impact of around $6.5 to $20 billion. So a pretty wide range. And on top of that, when we looked at the overall major outbreaks that had taken place, including the FMD one in the UK, probably around $1.7 to $2 billion are being lost every year because of controlling big outbreaks in that sense. So quite heavy losses or quite heavy burdens. But the only thing we included in this estimate here was the losses we estimated in terms of production and the vaccination costs. So everybody clapped their hands when we did this. This was for the global eradication program for FMD, and yet it had no impact in terms of funding. so it wasn't very effective as an advocacy message. And then we got questioned by the Gates Foundation, who said, well, how good are your estimations? Where's your data come from? Can you show us exactly where the data came from? And what impact does that have on smallholder farms? So we then did a further bit of work with Melissa McClaws and Theo again, and we actually explored a bit more carefully the data around smallholder farmer level impact. Who does it actually affect, and can we make sense of that impact? And when we pull that together, again, applying the same framework, so going across kind of milk losses, long and short term, we knew that was highly important, but our estimation of that was actually quite variable. So the data behind that estimation was not that great. And some of these things like reduced fertility, again, highly important in terms of estimation of burden, but actually very little data actually to support that. So how many people here would be able to tell me what the mortality rate is in calves in FMD? How much is it?
Close to 0.
Because you had the data.
No.
So when I first, yeah. So when I first started doing this back in 1999, I was told that calf mortality was 15%. But when you dig deep into that, that's nothing more than Chinese whispers. So people said it and then it became reality, but it wasn't backed up with any data. So I'm glad that you've come up with something that's more empirically based So there's lots of gaps in how we're estimating things, and this is common across a range of different diseases. It's not just FMD. So then Nick Lyons started doing his PhD at the Royal Veterinary College. I was somewhat involved in that process, and he came across a milking herd in Kenya that had just suffered an FMD outbreak, and they collected data. So we actually had data on milk production, on mortality, on culling, and this was a kind of pattern that we saw. Don't pay too much attention to the number of animals being milked going up, because that's just a seasonal issue. It's nothing to do with the disease. But you can see that the milk itself per cow dropped very suddenly when the disease outbreak started. The disease was clinically detected at this point, the 12th of August, but you can see that milk drop occurred well before that date. So these animals were infected before that took place. And when Nick and I were talking about this, our first thought would be to divide up the animals between clinically infected and non-clinically infected and work out the difference between their milk yields. So we did that, and this is what we got. So the solid line is reported FMD, and the dotted line is non-reported FMD. So it looks like every animal was actually impacted, but not every animal had blisters or clinical symptoms. So we were stuck with an issue that we had to then think about how do we deal with that. And Nick worked with statisticians to take the data for this period and project it forward, and then do calculations about our projections versus actual milk loss. And then it gets a bit more interesting. So when we started to look at that in terms of parity and in terms of stage of lactation, actually some parity 1 appeared to improve with milk production rather than decrease. And the worst affected were actually parities 4+ in the second stage of lactation. Now, it's only because Nick managed to get hold of these data from a friendly farmer that he could actually start to pull this apart. So it's a great demonstration of the need to have data matched against production in this sense. So I need to go back for a second. So my point here, Nick did this, again, nearly a decade ago. Has anybody bothered to repeat it? No. Are we looking for possibilities of repeating this with other diseases? I'd say not frequently enough, and that limits our accuracy of actually estimating the burden of disease. So if you're involved in FMD trials or you're involved in looking at farms with FMD, please think about whether we can capture some of these data, and can we get students onto the data to actually pull it apart and sort of see better that work. Yeah. But the story goes on. You know, we still continue to do estimates of interventions. So Henk supervised Wudu Temesgen's work on foot and mouth disease in Ethiopia. We generated a cost-benefit analysis on FMD in Ethiopia. I'm glad that you're here. So we did some work on Uruguay, which has got a really tough challenge. Do they continue to vaccinate in an environment where they've not seen disease for 20-odd years? Or do they drop it? And it's a really difficult problem to actually face. And Nick Lyons has also done some work in Pakistan recently in terms of thinking about best strategies. So, but all this is ongoing without really a really strong empirical base about what the true burden of FMD is. So we're still making guesses around that particular point, which gives me an entry into the global burden of animal diseases. And what we're trying to do with GBADS is to have a systematic framework to assess the burden of diseases in order to improve decision making with regards to productivity issues, thinking about small scale farmers, the efficiency of use of scarce natural resources, and actually thinking about how we impact the use of the environment. And there's 3 things that we're trying to do with this program with regards to providing information. We want to try and give people a better chance of having investment plans in the animal health systems. So remembering that we need investment in research and education and coordination. If you don't have that, don't bother bolting on a FMD campaign, because you can't have the 2 things together working well. We need allocation of resources within the veterinary system that are actually directed towards key problems. And we need to have data structures that actually allow us to evaluate whether we've been successful or not, or whether we've failed. We started by having a fairly straightforward analytical framework. The context: how many animals do we have? What are they worth? What's their biomass? What's the gap between current levels of production and expenditure and a state where the animals are not suffering any kind of problems? Attributing that by causes, by different disease issues, and then thinking about that from an economy perspective. So we have a farm level burden estimation, which provides us with big numbers, and we're using that information in terms of thinking about the societal impacts on the economy as a whole. You can look at this on our webpage. So if you go to this web address in the bottom corner, you'll find that these dashboards, they're prototype dashboards, so don't take them as read, but they'll give you some information about what we're calling our animal health loss envelope, and this is primarily at the moment for Ethiopia. We're breaking that up in terms of what are we losing in production, but also expenditure, issues on feed, on labour, on health, and we're then breaking that information up here into different types of diseases, but also different production systems and different age groups. Where's FMD in this? It's that little bit there. Now, these are early estimations, so there might be some error, but FMD is not necessarily huge, even within the context of infectious disease issues. And if you look at the numbers behind it, and again, take this with a little bit of pinch of salt, these are early estimations, our crop livestock mix systems and our pastoral systems, we think are probably losing in the region of $300 million a year from FMD. So it's not minor in a country that's very poor. So even though the size of this box might not look very big, it's still quite significant in the overall terms of the economy. And the other thing that is frustrating to me is that we do have technologies to control that. So we do have vaccines that would make that box smaller, probably. And that's one of our challenges, is actually taking this information, going back to people with money and with decision-making power to actually give farmers access to good vaccines. Yeah. And we can look at this from a wider economic supply issue. So we can start to imagine what would GDP look like if we got rid of all the health issues. And we can see there could well be quite significant changes in GDP with better management of mortality in this structure. And we can start to break down that change across society into who's actually impacted. Is it producers, processors, or is it consumers? And one thing I would say, if we improve animal health at production level, don't think our producers are going to gain. It's almost inevitable that the consumer and the value chain actors will actually benefit. And if we want the producers to actually benefit, we need a raft of policy measures to support them. So just initial work that we've done so far would give some kind of good answers in terms of taking that forward. We are also thinking about human health. We're linked to the global burden of disease work at IHME in Seattle, and we're linked to FERG, foodborne disease work in Ciansano. We are looking at antimicrobial resistance and zoonoses, and yes, Dr. Anne, zoonoses, FMD is in there, bizarrely enough. But obviously FMD affects nutrition, so we need to sort of take that into account. And then one final plug, Phil Rasmussen has recently moved from Zurich to Copenhagen, and Henk, I think you're working with Phil now. He's about to publish a paper on economic losses due to foot and mouth disease in Ethiopia, which is probably going to be more detailed than I've just sort of skimmed over recently. Yeah, so just bear with me for a sec, Henk. You probably want me to sit down, but I want to sort of go back to where I started. So if we're going to apply economics to animal health, what do we want to do with it? And if you're a true economist, and I'm not, I use economics, but I wouldn't say I'm a true economist, then a true economist will be really cold-hearted. They'll come in, they'll look at a system, and they'll tell you that some resource allocation issues are weak and actually make suggestions about how we improve them. What I've done through my career is that some vet or some animal health person comes up and says, my disease is really important, I've got this strategy, give me a cost benefit analysis. Yeah, which is fine, but this here with the economist approach is actually thinking about adding value through searching for optimality, whereas this one's adding value through advocacy. Okay, and if you come up with a negative answer with your cost benefit analysis, they'll just go and find another economist. So that tends to be the case. But one of the things I think we really need to try and do is try to bring these two things together. We can only do that by underpinning our work with better data. So if we're going to say economics is a science, it can't be based on just guesswork. And a lot of things we're doing in the burden estimations is guesswork. So we're moving towards that. The idea is that we leave a legacy behind with regards to the burden of animal disease. We start providing better information at national level of the livestock species affected and also the health losses. And we work with groups like Wageningen and Henk's group in terms of thinking about how do we work together to develop better training materials and deliver them across the world in that sense. And we are starting with different case studies. We're working with Utrecht, and Henk, that's one of your former PhD students as well. So it's a nice link there. But we've got a case study going on in Ethiopia. We're working in Indonesia, and we're currently initiating work in Senegal. So we are actually starting to develop a community of practice, and what I'd encourage people to do, if you're interested, please come back to me and we'll try and make sure that we can link in and work together. And the aim of that is that we seek opportunities to improve investments, allocation of resources, evaluating successes through clever and sustainable use of data and analysis. And the reason for me doing this is because I want Juanita Perez and her children to actually not be told foot and mouth disease is what we're offering, but actually deal with the problems she had, which were about nutrition, genetics, and parasites, and give her information that actually relates to her problems. And she's not alone. So if you go across the world, there's probably still about 1 billion people who are smallholder farmers. So there's 1 billion of Juanita Perez's around the world. They are alone in terms of what they access in terms of animal health, but they're not alone in terms of numbers. And we have to think about how we include them in our animal health system. This work is funded by a range of different people, but it's quite a big group of people. And a lot of what I presented today is their work. So I'd just like to finish by saying thank you to the funders and the collaborators. Henk, back to you.
Well, thank you for that, Jonathan. Well, you were in a hurry a little bit, but we have 5 minutes left. So, so yeah, there's room for 1 or 2 questions. You have to speak in the microphone for the people at home.
Yeah, maybe this is a difficult question, but one point I wonder about is that in this whole framework, eradication of infections at some scale, farm scale or regional scale, is not an issue. I mean, it's still an economic thing because you will get it back and you need to keep free of the infection, but it's also a possibility to deal. I mean, not with every infection, but for foot-and-mouth disease. I mean, that's what the FAO has as its goal to get countries or regions free of foot-and-mouth disease. So I missed that in this framework. Would you comment?
We're not actually looking at interventions in the global burden of animal disease. We're setting baselines of what's actually happening. So in a country like the Netherlands, then ideally we'd actually be able to tell people how much it's costing them with regards to foot and mouth disease. So Aldo, you probably lose your job if we declare how much you're paid and what you're doing on FMD. But no, but being more serious, you maintain a capacity in the laboratory system and have international links with groups to actually understand why foot and mouth disease is operating. So it's not about production loss, it's about expenditure in key kind of strategic areas of science that the cost would be built in. Yeah. Yeah. So
I would like to understand how that is related to the framework.
Well,
repeat?
No. I think I'm getting your point, but we're capturing the expenditure versus the loss. And in other places, it could well be that Thailand, the best thing to do is be endemic. But we actually can't say that until we actually look at the relationship between expenditure and loss and to work out the drivers. And similarly, there will be other diseases that have endemicity on them because of the economic situation that they're in. Does that kind of start to answer your question? Or
I wonder how we could economically compare that. So how would we know that Thailand would be better off being free of foot-and-mouth disease?
So go back.
Keeping it endemic or keeping it endemic on scale?
If we went back to the graphic I showed you, where we've got a relationship between production loss and expenditure, then the point of optimality will be driven by how much we value animals versus how much we value vaccination. Yeah. So there could well be a point where it's just about being endemic, unless we want to put lots of public money into actually eradication.
But that's where my question started. That doesn't catch the eradication. So if you are free, then you have a totally different problem. It's not as if you have the disease and you spend a certain amount of money to reduce the burden of that disease,
but
and you have some
yeah.
kind of equilibrium, but you are free, and then you get into a new cycle that you have an introduction or you don't, but you spend money to try to keep it out of your country. So
but
it's a totally different situation.
But you're moving into, I think, describing an initial stage of thinking about cost-benefit analysis and moving towards eradication rather than setting the baseline, which is what we're trying to do. Yeah.
I saw that, yeah, oh, there's 2 people and 1 minute left. Yeah. Oh, you were just putting on your jacket. Okay, well, that's also a way to raise your hand. A short question, Ron.
Just a question about distribution of costs and benefits. Just a question about distribution of costs and benefits. That's the moment you start eradicating or controlling a disease, is then your poor livestock farmer, your peasant farmer, is that really helped, or is it who's going to pay the costs and who's going to pay the benefits, and how to introduce elasticity of price when you have access to new markets?
I'm going to cop out on this and ask you if we can talk about that over a beer a bit later, for the sake of time.
And the beers will there at the end of the symposium. So good. Let's continue to the main act of this afternoon. I'll proudly introduce you, Dr. Thanicha Chanchaidechachai, to talk about. Here you have the microphone and.
Hello, okay. Hey. Okay. I think everyone can hear me. Okay.
They should be able.
Yes, and yep. Okay. So. Greeting everyone in this room and also people who join online webinar. It's my pleasure to present my last chapter of PhD thesis and a little bit pleasure to present after Jonathan Rushton. Okay, so in the last chapter of my thesis, I'm doing the bioeconomic modeling of the area specific of FMD control in Thailand. I will let me start by explain the situation of the foot-and-mouth disease in Thailand, because it's quite different from the Europe and also maybe different from Indonesia and Uruguay that you will learn from the next presenter. Because foot-and-mouth disease in Thailand is endemic. And even though the government spend a lot of money for the vaccination program, we still have an outbreak ongoing every year. For example, from 2014 to 2020, we have 1,200 outbreaks happen. As you can see from this map, it shows the outbreak that happened in Thailand from that year. And you can see that the outbreak just spread across country. And the nature of the outbreak in Thailand is quite different than in Europe, because the outbreak in our country tend to be small and localized in only few sub-districts. And the severity of the outbreak also very different between the area, depend on the farm type, depend on animal species. So that is very different from European country. And yeah, we learned that from previous slide that the FMD outbreak vary between the area. So it means that the general control measure that everyone do the same thing probably doesn't work in Thailand. So that's why it leads to my research objective to do the area specific control measure. But to do something like that, we also need to know about the economic. And this kind of study rarely done in Thailand before. So that leads to my first research objective to develop the bioeconomic modeling of the FMD control measure. And the second factor that also affect the control measure also about the farmer compliance. But rarely any modeling consider about the farmer compliance in their model. So in my study, I also add the farmer compliance as one of the factor in the model. So let's talk about the study area. As I introduced before, that the outbreak in Thailand tend to be localized in one sub-district. That's why in this study, we choose the study area of the Lampayakang sub-district. The reason that we choose this area is because it's the area with the high reoccurrence of the outbreak. As you can see from the map, it's the area that you have the dark red area. That's this area. And also, the FMD outbreak happened in this area in 2016. And after the outbreak, we did the outbreak investigation to collect the data, include the farm location, farm site, animal species, and the outbreak duration in the farm. And with this high informative data, we use it to derive the transmission parameter. Okay, so let me briefly explain about the bioeconomic model that I used in the study. So the model includes two parts. The first part is the epidemiological model, which we will use to simulate the outbreak. And we use the input data from the outbreak investigation that we already did, and the transmission rate that we derived, which I will explain in the detail later. And from this outbreak simulation, we will get the output as the number of the infected farm, the outbreak duration, and the number of affected farm from the control measure. And with this output, we use it in our economic model to calculate the cost of the outbreak. We specify the cost into the direct cost from the disease itself and the indirect cost from implementing the control measure. And the interesting part is we specify the cost between the stakeholders. So in this study, we include the stakeholder of the government and compliant farm and non-compliant farm. So let's go into the detail of the epidemiological model. So the model that we use is the stochastic distribution model. It means that each farm is the individual unit. And each farm can be in the 5 states that I show in this slide. So the first, the farm becomes susceptible. And after the farm gets infection, it will become latent. After the latent period, the farm will become undetected infectious. In this state, the farm can spread the disease to the other farm. And after the number of the animal got infected in the farm reached the limit, the outbreak in the farm will got detected and it will become detected infectious. And later it will become recover. So the status of the farm will be get evaluated at 1 day time step. So every day the status of the farm in the area will be applied and updated. And we start our model with 3 index cases. So 3 infectious farms introduced into our model. Okay, that is a part that I think is quite interesting, because normally when you did the model in Europe, maybe the most famous model is interspread. I'm not sure that you know the detail about that, but in that kind of model, they will specify the probability of transmission by each route separately. But because this kind of model, we need a very high detail data that in our country, we don't have that. So that's why that brings us to the concept of the spatial transmission kernel. Because biologically, we know that the farm that close to the infectious farm have a higher chance to get infection more than the farm that far away. That's why the concept of spatial transmission kernel is to explain the transmission rate depend on the distance between the farm. So if the farm is far away from the infectious farm, they will have a lower transmission rate. So as the graph that you see on the bottom of the slide, so this graph shows the transmission rate, and that decrease as the distance between the farm increase. And if the graph was explained by this mathematical equation, so and the shape and the height of the graph are explained by this transmission parameter. We estimate this transmission parameter by fit this mathematical equation with the outbreak data and then using maximum likelihood. So from this, we can get the transmission kernel from Thailand data. Yes, and also as I introduced before that the transmission rate of FMD also relate to the animal species and farm site. So we add 2 more functions to modify the transmission kernel. So the first one is the farm size function to explain easily. So it's like if the farm size is bigger, the transmission rate will be higher. That's the meaning of this function. And another thing is the heterogeneous transmission between animal species. So it's like it's calculated from the infectivity and susceptibility of the animal species multiplied by the likelihood that the farm between animal species will contact each other. So that gives the heterogeneous transmission between different animal species. And with this modification, we can calculate the transmission rate between different farm and different animal species. This quite a complex mathematical model that easily explained. So after we get the transmission rate between the farm, we can calculate the probability of infection on each farm on each day. And with that, we can use it to simulate the outbreak. So now we have the outbreak simulation model. The next thing that I did is I add the control measure in each scenario. So we have 5 scenarios. The first one is the baseline that we don't have any control measure. So we just let the outbreak happen without any control. The second one is the culling of the animal in the infected farm. The third one is the link vaccination. Fourth one is the animal movement restriction. And the fifth one is the isolation of the infected farm. And for each control measure, we also add the efficacy parameter to modify the efficacy of the control measure. For example, for the culling infected farm, we have the parameter of the delay culling day at 1, 7, and 14. So 1 is the best efficacy and 14 is the worst. And for the link vaccination, we have vaccine efficacy from 25 to 100. For the animal movement restriction and isolation, we have the percent of the transmission rate reduction. Then I go to the detail for the economic model. So after we got the outcome from our epidemiological model, we will know the number of infected farm, the outbreak duration, and the number of the affected farm. And also we have some economic input from the literature, farmer interview, and also expert opinion. And with this, we can calculate the direct cost from the production loss and the indirect cost from the control measure. And then we specify the cost by the 3 stakeholders. The first one is the government. Second is the compliant farm. It means that the farm that follow the regulation. And the third one is non-compliant farm. It means that the farm that not follow the control measure. So this is the part of the farmer compliance. As I introduced before, that normally the model will never include this farmer compliance. But in our study, we want to see the effect of the farmer compliance. And the way that we do it, like we randomize the percent of the farm to be compliant and non-compliant. And we test the compliance level from 25 to 100%. Let's see the result from this study. For the result, this is the result from the base efficacy of the control measure with 100% compliance level. And you can see that the first, okay, this one you can see that is the baseline without any control measure. You can see that the number of the infected farm is very high compared to the scenario that we have control measure. It means that for this area, the control measure is the requirement to control the outbreak. And if you look at the cost of the control measure, you can see that it's very different, especially for the animal movement restriction. It have a very high cost. That is almost not practical to do it in real situation. Okay, let's see the result of the control measure when we have a different compliance level. So I will. So for this graph is the result from the counting. The red line that you see was the baseline when there is no control measure, and the color of the block represent the different level of the compliance level. And for each group of the block is a different efficacy level of the control measure. With this side is the lowest and that side is the highest. So for the counting, you can see that in terms of the outbreak control is the best control measure. But if you see the total cost is quite expensive. So it means that even though it's the best control measure in terms of the outbreak control, it might not be the cost effectiveness. And this graph shows the result from the isolation of the infected farm. And yeah, the way that you read the graph is also the same as the previous graph. I think the interesting part from the isolation is if you look at the total cost when the efficacy of control measure is very low, you can see that with the low compliance level, it actually have a lower total cost than when you have higher compliance level. It means that if the control measure is not effective, it's better to do nothing. It's more money to do nothing. So that's quite interesting result that I got. And this graph is come from the link vaccination. So overall, the link vaccination have a very low total cost. As you can see that the cost is quite lower than the baseline. And if you see that, you will see the relation between the compliance level and the vaccine efficacy. So if we have a higher compliance level, our vaccine efficacy doesn't need to be that high to control the outbreak. But on the other hand, if we have lower compliance level, we need a higher vaccine efficacy to control the outbreak. Let's go to the economic results. So this graph shows the cost distribution between government and the farmer. So the red block is the farmer and the green block is the government. So you can see that the different control measures have a different cost distribution. For example, for the counting, you can see that most of the costs paid by the government. And if you look at the link vaccination and isolation, most of the cost is responsible by the farmer. It means that it's very important, this information, because when we decide the control measure, we need to think that who will pay and how much they will pay. That's very important. And now I make the cost distribution between compliant farm and non-compliant farm. This is the result in the table is shown as the ratio. So it means that if the number is higher, they pay more. And the interesting part is we see that for the counting and isolation, the compliant farm pay more than the non-compliant farm, which means that the farmer might have less monetary incentive to follow the regulation, because if they don't follow, they get more benefit. That's the interesting part. But on the other hand, we have link vaccination that the compliant farm pay less than the non-compliant farm. It means that they might have more incentive to follow the link vaccination more than the other control measure. So let's go to the conclusion for this. We see that from the cowling that even though it's the best control measure in terms of control the outbreak, but it might not be the best in terms of cost effectiveness. So we need to think, link to Jonathan graph that you see, we need to think about what is the trade-off that we can accept. And also, we see that the non-compliant farm was better off than the compliant farm in the cowling and isolation. So it means that sometimes farmer might have incentive to not follow the control measure. So it's very important for government to have policy to incentivize farmer to follow the control measure to guarantee that we can successfully control the outbreak in Thailand. And I would say that in my study, it's just the case from one area. The result might not be the same as in other area, but it's the main point that I want to tell from this study is like it's the first step that you learn how to decide the control measure based on the input from that's specific to this area. Yeah. And for the future research, that's what I see. Because in my study, you see that it's quite heavily invest into the epidemiology. For the social science part, it's a small thing like only the economic calculation and compliance level. But in the future, there might be some idea that we can do more, like we add the behavior study to explain the compliance level, or we do the interaction between the economic impact and the farmer compliance. That's also what the thing that we can do for the future research. The goal is not to make 50-50 between epidemiology and social science, but the goal for this is to integrate social science and epidemiology together to make a novel approach that we can use for better animal health decision. Yeah. Okay, and thank you my supervising team and the data support from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and funding from my PhD from Ananta Mahidol Scholarship. Yeah. And thank you all for being here and people who join online webinar.
Yes, well, you were very nicely on time, so we have some time for questions from the audience. Well, you're the closest by, Aldo, so go to you.
I was a little bit, in one of your graphs, you showed that the costs of vaccination was lower at a compliant farm than on a non-compliant farm. But in the previous graph, you showed that the cost of vaccination was mainly from the farmer. And I would assume that the highest cost of vaccination is the vaccine cost and labor. So if you're not compliant, you don't have vaccination cost and labor. Why is then the cost so high?
I think maybe I know what. Maybe I get back to the graph that you mentioned. Is this graph, right? Yeah. So you see that yes, as you say that most of the costs in the farmer, but if you see that the total cost is still very low compared to the cowling. So even though farmer pay more, but the total cost is still quite low. And come back to your question about why it's still low, because vaccination, I assume that the government will pay for the vaccine. That's what the situation in Thailand. So the government produce the vaccine and provide it to the farmer by free of charge.
But then the cost for the vaccine is not in the graph.
Yes, it's already included, but it's total cost. So it's also include the cost from the production loss from the infection also. Yeah.
Gustavo had a question as well, so.
I think one question, because I don't know in your area or in the area of your case study or in Thailand, is there, let's say, animal movement? Let's say, suppose that this is your area, can be introduced or get it out animals from the area and coming, let's say, introduction of infectious animals, and how this can affect your model and your calculations?
Okay, thank you for your question. Yes, I think that's also one of the limited of my study. So in this model, I assume that it was the closed population. So there is no new animal introduced into the area. But yeah, if we want to improve the model, we also need to include that in the model. Yes. It's happened, yes. Yeah.
This looks at an outbreak.
During outbreak.
This looks at one outbreak.
Yes, this looks as one outbreak, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess if there's no more hands and questions, yeah, there is one. Good. Yeah.
Nice presentation, Anne. I was thinking about sometimes the government would like to combine the interventions, right? If there is any outbreak, then they will try to isolate and then to do the vaccination. So is there any that kind of combination of interventions included in your model, or? Yeah.
Yeah, that's also what the reality. So normally when it happened, they always combine control measure. Yeah, like animal movement restriction and link vaccination at the same time. But in my study now, we still did not make a combination because we want to quantify each control measure solely. But yes, that's the next step that I think that we should do to reflect the reality. Yes.
Okay. I guess then we call it the first half of the symposium, which means we have break. Fresh coffee and tea was, hot water, but you have to make your own tea, was brought in earlier this afternoon, so it's in the back. These types of meetings being here, in the room is always good because you can share thoughts and talk and discuss and also ask all the questions you wanted to ask Anne and Jonathan about their presentations. So for that, let's start 5 to 4, which means that we may have a few minutes more for final discussion at the end. So half an hour break, and thanks so far.
So I will be chairing the second part because Henk is one of the presenters. I don't know whether he couldn't do chairing and presenting at the same time, but so we have 3 speakers and then some time left for discussion. So I will try to watch the time keeping. But we start 5 minutes earlier, so we're also ready 5 minutes earlier. And so first, Henk Hogeveen will talk about the role of economics and social science in the control of infectious diseases. Microphone is yours.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have too many slides. So if I'm chairing with too many slides to start with, definitely things go out of hand. So that's we need an external one. Good. Well, we all know about notifiable diseases, right? And of the burden of that. We have quite some knowledge, although there's always more knowledge to be gained, we always say. But often one of the problems is how to apply it and to apply it. And then economics and social sciences come into place. One way to do that, if we have great plans, is what Jonathan already showed, where he said, well, this is the program I want to promote. Let's use a cost-benefit analysis, and if that's possible, we should promote this. That's one way. But if you look at diseases, and this is a bit of an exercise I do quite often. I think we all agree that we do need some economics and knowledge about the uses of the methods so that we know how to implement it, how to improve the efficiency of the methods, etc., etc. But then if you go to the scientific literature, and I know this is very basic, but I did do a very quick search earlier this week where I used the title Keywords Foot and Mouth Disease. then have cow, bovine, or cattle, because otherwise you get hand, foot, and mouth disease in humans, and there's way more publications about hand, foot, and mouth disease in humans than foot and mouth disease in cloven hoof animals. Since the 2010, there's 1,053 papers. Good, so be it. If you then try to combine that with, well, some synonyms about the social science, economics, etc., there are way more out there. Social, economic, cost, finance, behavior, type of stuff. There's only 35 left, which is a little more than 3%. So it's also interesting discrepancy between well, say social sciences, economics, and economics is a social science, and some of the other work. But anyway, that's going into that. And one of the reasons we have been thinking about that with a group of people within the social sciences could be that all of these different social sciences, it's very difficult to understand what they're all doing. Why do we need and what's there? Well, we know economics, right? We know we have to pay for the measures, so we have to defend our budgets. That means we need a cost-benefit analysis. Good. But why should you need social psychology, communication sciences? Well, we also know something that ethics may be important, yes or no. But all these different disciplines, you know, this building, the Department of Social Sciences, the Leeuwenborg, we have some, I think 25, 26 chair groups. All of different topic, different work, different part of social sciences. And especially if you're in medicine or veterinary medicine or whatever, well, it's all one big heap. When I was working in Utrecht, I was the social sciences in Utrecht. And people say, oh yeah, we need to do something in marketing. Can you teach about marketing? Whoa, that's something totally different. I have to learn as much. So that's a part of that. That means as well that in the social science, we have to do better, represent ourselves and bring together what to do. So we try to think a little bit about to look at the value of the various disciplines that there are, how they interrelate, overlap, etc. And well, you know, when, in which places in the whole problems about notifiable infectious diseases should we place it. And the first idea I had was that let's just define all the different disciplines within the social sciences and then see how can we apply them to notifiable diseases. Impossible. Because there is no clear definitions. We don't even, in the social science, we don't even know which disciplines we have. And there was a picture I got with an umbrella, and then, but if you go to other sides, there's other definitions. So, well, the disciplines themselves are difficult to work. So then I started, well, let's think the other way around. Let's start from reasoning of the animal health system and a reason back where, in which aspects you need it. And I try to summarize that a little bit in this short presentation. So there's a huge amount of research going on into development of novel diseases, emerging diseases, etc., etc. Of course, there's a lot of work on transmission or the occurrence of outbreaks, maybe regional, interregional, within farm, between farms, etc., etc. You all know about that, and that gives a certain animal health burden. Of course, some of these notifiable infectious diseases are zoonoses, so then there's also a human health burden. Well, that's kind of the system we're working in, right? And of course, lots more to say. But all of these disease occurrence thing, there's a huge amount of drivers behind that. And I'm not talking, still not talking about economics or social sciences, biodiversity, farm sizes, all kind of wildlife, human, domestic, animal contact interactions, trade and travel. Let's not forget it. Jonathan already said it, you know, about foot and mouth in England in the 1960s. Trade was very important, infrastructure, whatever. All bunch of drivers. I think we often talk about them. There's a quite big amount of conceptual papers out there describing how important it all is, but quantifying is something else. We try to, but it's quite difficult as well. And the first part of the social science is basically the burden. And Jonathan said a lot about that. Societal impact, it's an economic burden, but it's more than that, of course. This, you know, when it's about subsistence, it's also about livelihoods, etc. And it may be the human health burden as well as the animal health burden. We need to estimate that. So much of this work, much of the work in economics is aimed this part. There's a disease. What are the economic consequences of the disease as a starting point? And if we know those economic consequences, or the other consequences, then we may start working on something else. So that's the first part where economics or social sciences are very important. It's also the part where most of the work out there has been carried out. Yes, okay, yes, that's basically what I said. So those diseases are there. Broader insights are coming from a global bird and animal disease framework. Very nice to also try to bring it together and, you know, make it in such a way that disease become comparable. But it goes beyond that. And one of the questions you got, Anne, this morning was about price effect societies. What will happen, you know, if the cost for farmers are up? Yeah, at the end, the consumer will pay the price, because that's how economies work and how demand supply works. But it's much more than that as well, because, well, you know, looking at human health, the disability or the quality of just life years play a role. But also the social injustice and the distribution of consequences may play a role. And then it may even differ between certain societies. That's something about the impact. Going a bit further, if we know that all these, you know, these novel disease and transmission, etc., is driven by a wide range, well, behind everything, there are also a lot of, well, social and economic drivers. So trade and travel is basically happening because of differences in prices. If there's a difference in price and or difference in quality, then trade will happen. If that's not the case anymore, then trade will disappear. And of course, that has to do with, you know, so these drivers here are happening. And we can say something about that farm sizes should be reduced because we want to reduce the probability of novel diseases occurring, if that's the case. Yeah, but there's a reason farm sizes grow. So we can either just make laws or we can take away reasons. And inside in those reasons why things happen plays a role. There's a reason that biodiversity is decreasing or that people work on it. And insights in that may work on it. Of course, there's economics, all kind of macro, micro and business economics, but also our behavior, our cultures, our way of living, governance of systems may also play a role. So in order to change something on these drivers, we may need to know how those drivers are happening and what's behind it. Otherwise, change may be difficult. Yeah, again, this is going deeper. You know, there's lots of reasons why we're doing what we're doing, and that has those are economic, but also on behavioral. And I'm not a real economist, but maybe because of that, I'm also able to think about other drivers than economic drivers. Good. Next step, and we are heavily interested in these things: measures to prevent or to mitigate or to control diseases. So we want to dive into those. And of course, there's the effect on the burden or the occurrence or whatever. We play around, and well, Anne has been presenting about that. He worked on that. So that's the technical association, and sometimes that's already difficult. I know how difficult it was already to estimate the effect of some of the measures on the kernel, because the kernel was looking at this. Well, then we implement, or we try to implement a measure, but how is the kernel affected? Oopsie, that was already a little thing, but we estimated it, and that will then have an effect on the burden, but also will have an effect on society, because there's cost involved. And if you spend your money on vaccinations for farmers, well, you can't spend the money on something else. You also can have these measures, of course, looking at that side over there. And so we want to weigh that. And that's the typical cost-benefit analysis, because there's the direct societal impact, costs of measures. There's a reduction of the burden, benefits, and you try to weigh that. And it was already a little discussion that you started on the presentation of Jonathan about that. So that's the part there. Often we use utility theory for that, which is an economic theory that, well, that kind of assumes that we rationally weigh the effects of measures, and well, then take that measure that has the best effect on our objectives. But there's a bunch of other aspects playing around as well. For instance, about the compliance, right? And Professor Evan Bulte this morning already talked about that in the defense. Yes, you know, the free riders often have the benefit. Well, you show that. So why would you do that? Well, maybe because we also are law-abiding good citizens. At least part of us is that, and therefore we do some things. So that may be voluntary uptake, but also distribution of cost and benefits plays a big role. Who's paying, who's benefiting? Special interest groups may react quite strongly or come up for themselves. All kind of effects beyond the direct involved stakeholders. Changes in supply and demand that play a role. Under all kind of outbreak conditions and various communication strategies. And there comes communication into account as well. So there's a wide range of effects beyond the economics that may look at that. And so this part are the cost efficiency or cost benefit calculations, but we have a bunch of intangible effects. We have ethical dilemmas as well that play a role, and we have to weigh that. So that means that we not only have more or less rational effects of these things, but there are ways to improve the effect. Maybe improve the compliance to measures and to bring it further. And economics play a role there, of course, because we can give penalties or subsidies. Uptake of vaccination is much higher when the government subsidizes the vaccine. And if you have to pay that yourself as a farmer, well, things will change probably. Attitudes of people may play a role, the governance, how things are organized, and communication methods, education, as you called it this morning. So that's also playing a role. So all in all, often we have, well, reasonable or enough knowledge to control animal disease crisis. Often we need some more knowledge about it, technical knowledge. We need to know something more about this new serotype of foot-and-mouth disease that may develop and how it's behaving. But also the control is, well, we know about it. We have to implement it efficiently. And this requires knowledge on actor behavior as well as knowledge on how to motivate them. So that was very short in a nutshell, a bit of which aspects of the whole system of notifiable diseases where we can implement economics/social sciences. And I hope that we can learn a few things more about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we move at 3 examples. So we postponed the discussion to after that. So we will first discuss the 3 examples, Thailand, Uruguay, Indonesia. And first we have Thailand again. Chaidate will present about the endemic situation and how to deal with that. So we have the 3 different situations: the endemic situation, re-emergence.
Oh, oopsie, oopsie.
The wrong one. So we have the endemic situation in Thailand, the re-emergence in Indonesia, and being free with vaccination in Uruguay. Can I give you the word and the microphone?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Sorry guys, this is what I wanted to prevent, to put everything in place. But I stored Chaidate's presentation or Anne's presentation on the Chaidate name. So get it from my email. Sorry for that.
Okay, thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank Henk to invite me to join this symposium, also for Anne Defense. And also congratulations for Anne for your success to defend your thesis. And when I start to work with foot-and-mouth disease in 2016, that time that we got the research grant from the Thai government. Honestly, I don't know how to
work with infectious modeling or transmission. We just because in 2016 that we have a high incident of the foot and mouth disease, just reached up in Thailand that the Thai government would like us to investigate what happened in Thailand that time. And so we just work with several people in Thailand in several universities, just collect data and try to look at an audit, look at for the risk factor, and also for many things that we do that. But luckily that Anne also got a scholarship for full scholarship to study abroad to join the group in Wageningen and also Utrecht that we that make it for the doing right the modeling of the transmission model, economic model is it's quite a very good study and good results. I'm very appreciate that. Thank you very much for all guys to support and help. Okay, that the topic that Henk gave to me to talk to you this afternoon. And okay, after 2016, 2017, at the current situation, we still have the like the outbreak in Thailand is still in endemic. There's this and already present in Thanicha publications, and if you look at in the 2016 and 17, as you can see the high incident rate here into 16, 17, and also we found mostly of the report of the foot and mouth disease, mostly, and we found almost often every year in the central part, especially in the high density area of the dairy cow populations. Maybe just presents this morning, maybe because they just have like the dairy cow, they have a very good connection with the corporations, milk cooperative, and then they easy for to get the information. But for the dairy cattle, also buffalo, that that we don't have information much, and then maybe they are under the report that can happen. But for this area that we focusing on work in this province, and we have a campus of our university there and work very much on the dairy populations, and then we have high incidence here. And also mostly of the serotype that happen in Thailand is O and A. And, okay, and you can look at until 2019 is still have the high incidence of the foot and mouth disease, and O, A, and is the major serotype. And if you look at for the phylogenetic of the for Thai-O, and you can see mostly for the Thai-O like Myanmar 98, and also in 2016 that we have the new strain that we found is a Thai-O India 2001, and but the first report in Vietnam and Cambodia, and also later on we report in Thailand. And the last year, 2022, they have a report in Indonesia as well. This might be related with outbreak in Thailand or in Vietnam or Cambodia. Yeah, for Thai also that mostly for Southeast Asia 97 that we found. And this information from the regional reference lab foot and mouth disease of the Southeast Asia in Thailand. They just have the biosurveillance, and also they have the sample from the Southeast Asia and sent to the lab. And also for the strain that they found in 2016. 2017 that we have like the new strain of the India 2001, But for A also that almost the same that we found. And for the prevention and control, okay, normally we do vaccination for using a trivalent vaccine O and O, A and HA1. Yeah, we apply for 2 or 3 times per year. And also when have the problem with the animal movement, mostly from the Myanmar to Thailand and before distribute to other countries, mainly we go to the south, to Malaysia. And also we have, okay, border control, we register or tagging the animal from the origin to the destination. And also we have the quarantine. And when this is outbreak, that okay, the government that they do that emergency ring vaccination, disinfectant, and also movement, animal movement restriction. And also we have the regular surveillance by RRL, regional reference lab, doing the program sampling, look at the virus strain, the change of the virus strain. And also they check for the vaccine matching, compare between vaccine strain, and also look compare with the look at the serological relation with the virus strain, with the field strain. For the socio-economic challenge for the economics that and also do a lot of that. But for the social impact, they have a few studies, and also we don't know exactly because in Thailand that we have many stakeholders that involved in the chain of the production. When we look at for the dairy cow community, it's not only the farmer, but also they have like inseminator, they have like a milk collector center, we have feed delivery trucks, yeah, we have the milk collecting trucks that involved to for the involved in the chain of the production that they might influence of the spread of the disease in the community. Okay, the loss that depend on many factors, herd size, also species, and in 2016 that we have the high outbreak in pig industry in 2016 and 17, and even they have in the big farm. But I think at that time, yeah, it's might related with the new strain from others. That, but later on, the pig for the pig industry, they have a few cases of the foot and mouth disease in 2018 and 19. And but yes, I think it's very challenging to for the disease control in Thailand because we have a movement of the animal from yeah, especially from the on the west from the Myanmar, and also the virus strain also that it can vary on the time, and also they have the they have new strain come in, and also we have one study that look at the productive level of immunity that we found the level of the immunity that's quite very short, especially for the vaccine for Thai A. For Thai O, that's okay. So just for 4 months, and then the level of immunity just go down. And also for the vaccinators in Thailand, that we quite some area that farmer they have to vaccinate the cow, the cattle by themselves, but also it's quite some they're quite difficult to normally that we vaccinate by subcutaneous injection, right? But the farmer, they don't know how to control to restrain the animal. That sometimes they just do yeah, but it's not exactly to correct the injection. Sometimes they go to the intramuscular injection. And also in Thailand that we in the tropical climate, when you deliver the vaccine from the factory to the farms, of course, the farm the process must be in the cold chains, right? And also that sometimes they quite have the problem. But I show you the picture later on. And also for the small farm, that quite very difficult to improve the biosecurity at the farm level because now they have to get more fund for investment, right? If they have a low productivity and then they don't have enough money to invest for biosecurity. And also, for the biosurveillance, and also they might not enough facility for the disease early detection. And for this, I put here for the free vaccination policy, it can be pro and con, right? For the pro, that okay, there's a benefit for the farmer, but something is like because the government, they have their own factory to produce the vaccines, and then they're lacking the motivation to improve. And in Thailand, we have the factory, government factory, but the technology is quite really old. Now it needs to be improved. It's not only the technology, but also have to find out the quality to improve the quality of vaccine as well. Okay, this is the impact of the price to the animal movement. If you see the price of the cattle, here you can see the high price in Malaysia and Vietnam. That's why when you look at the animal movement, is pushed from the lower price to the higher price of to the Malaysia or Vietnam. For the pigs, but after ASF outbreak in Southeast Asia, and I think this the price is changing a lot now, because now we found the first in China, come to Vietnam and Thailand and Laos. That it changed for this price. I cannot. The study, the report just 2011. It's a wrong time, but we have the outbreak ASF in Thailand in 2019. If you look at this map, you can see the movement of the green with cattle and buffalo, and the red is for the pigs. You can see they have in Thailand is like the hub of the movement. It's not only import but also export to other countries as well. That's why Thailand is have the high list of the disease. And so if you look at the variation is for example for the Type A, you can see from the year 2007 for the green and to the red 2016, the Type A variation, they have genetic change from year to year. So this the paper, that publication, they show that the relation of the serotype A in this region that they found they have related with the genetic of the serotype A. Okay, yes. Okay, for the vaccine matching test, And for the Thai oil, it's very good for matching, but for Thai is some year they have a very low percent for matching for the vaccine strain and field strain. Look at for the immunity, you can see this here for the Thai or after vaccination, and you can see after 120 days that the immunities go down compared with before vaccination. And also they have the related with the seasonal. Every year that you find the peak during the in the winter in Thailand. And also this show you for the cold chain of the vaccine. Some area that farmer they collect the vaccine by themselves. Some area they have the milk truck to deliver the vaccine to the farm. And also we evaluate for the low biosecurity if you compare for the this score from the farm and compare with the standard here that is quite very low for the smallholder farms. Yeah, this for smallholder farm they have like low biosecurity. Also they have poor nutrition and low productivity. If you would like to improve biosecurity or improve biosurveillance, that we need more. We should consider on how to improve productivity of the dairy farm as well. That's why we do a lot to improve the productivity in the dairy farms. But also we have to raise up the public awareness. It's not only the farmer that we involve, but also we should do more on the research and development in the more effective vaccine. And in Thailand, that we have this project to apply the digital technology, just not only to improve productivity, but also we try to develop algorithm to detect a number of sick animals in the area, like to raise up the biosurveillance in the dairy farm community. For this algorithm, they will, when we have cow is sick or show us that, they will alert to the inseminator or veterinarian in the area to check it up. This is outbreak or not, something like that. That is the concept. And also we training a lot of the for the farmer, not only for the disease prevention or control, but also to improve the production. And also we have like to try to set up the farm model to set for the learning from farm to farm. That we, in the long run, we hope we can improve productivity and then when the farmer have more benefit and they can invest for the biosecurity. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And also we'd like to thank you, our colleague, to work with the food and mouth disease in Thailand in that time. The data that mostly provided by regional reference lab.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I regret speeding you up because now I missed the part that I was very interested in about the matching of the vaccines.
Okay.
But we have to be sure that all the other presenters get a chance. So we will discuss afterwards.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So the next presenter will be Bart. He will be talking about the Indonesian experience with an outbreak in Java. That's Java.
Yep.
Other way up. Can you do that? You can turn this maybe. Oh, yeah, that's also possible.
Right. Thank you, Mart. Thank you, Henk, for putting the slides up. I want to start off by saying that it's just bad luck that I'm standing here. I was not supposed to be here. It's just the fact that we were doing work in Indonesia on a completely different topic, mastitis, which is where I have some expertise in, and milk quality. And then we were doing field work. We were supposed to do a longitudinal study or monthly visits to a farm. But then after one round of visiting, FMD broke out. So it's bad luck for the farmers that we were involved in our study. It was bad luck for Indonesia. And also bad luck for the PhD student who was doing the field work because we had to stop his data collection. But fortunately enough, we were able to, in this very short amount of time that we had, to set up some data collection on the outbreak in Indonesia. And I want to say thank you for Okti for coordinating that, and for Andy, who did most of the work actually in this project for her master thesis. I think it was this one, right? So Indonesia has been free from FMD without vaccination since 1986. So for over more than 35 years, it's been free of the disease. So that means it was a fully susceptible population without vaccination. So compared to Thailand, when the disease occurred, it rapidly spread across the country, and that made visible by it entered Indonesia in East Java, on Java Island, in the east part of the island on April 28th last year. Within a week or so, it was already appearing in West Java, and 1 week later it appeared in our study area where we were doing our field work. And eventually it turned out that 27 out of 38 provinces got infected by the outbreak. So the control strategy of the government was to implement biosecurity. There was a standstill, disinfecting of farms and visitors. Treatment was applied, mostly with vitamins. Testing was done. There were diseased animals that were slaughtered, but no preemptive culling was being applied, and vaccination was applied, I think, after 1.5 to 2 months after the outbreak, when the vaccine became available. So just to give you an overview of what we've been doing, so it's basically in the project is to describe the outbreak, what happened in the study area that we were involved in, and to estimate the effect of biosecurity and vaccination on the transmission of the virus. Did that have an effect, and how big was the effect? So this is a part of Indonesia. This is Java Island. Our study area was in Cianjur district, which is over there between Jakarta and Bandung. Our study area is in the north of this district, and it concerns of smallholders. So farmers have like 3, 4, 5 cows, and most of the dairy the entire dairy cattle population of Indonesia is located on Java Island. So it's mainly a dairy cattle population that's being present there. There's also some beef cattle were located in the northern sub-districts of our study area of the district. While sheep, goat, and buffalo were more in the southern sub-districts of Cianjur area. There were no pigs there. It's compared to Thailand, it's a different religion, so different species around. So what we had was we were doing a data collection involved with one dairy cooperative consisting of 120 dairy herds. They originally were all contributing to our original study, and then 58, almost half of the farmers continued in our current data collection on foot-and-mouth disease. And I think in more countries in Southeast Asia as well, farmers were grouped in what we have called farmers groups. So farmers within a group are geographically located close to each other, for instance, in a village, and they collaborate with each other on farming. They share a well. They have the same paramedic coming to the farm. for animal health problems or to inseminate the cow. So there's a natural organization of farms are naturally organized in these farmers groups, which is important for how the disease spread eventually. And we did that study from we started a week after the outbreak in East Java, and then our study started when the disease entered West Java, where our study population was, and it lasted for 25 weeks until the end of October, which is basically also the time when Andy was there doing all the field work or collecting the data. She was not doing any field visits, but mostly doing things by phone calls with the farmers. So what she did collect was we gathered the data from when FMD occurred at the farm, when were the first clinical signs appearing, when did the last cow develop the clinical signs. We had information about herd size, animal movements, date of birth and death. Also, when herds were vaccinated, we knew exactly which herd was vaccinated, when treatment was applied, and we had a bunch of variables on biosecurity. Were cows allowed to go out? Did they had contact with the animals from other herds? When were they disinfecting the farm, and how many visitors attended the farm? So this is some first results that we got. It's basically a timeline with the amount of farms that got infected by FMD. So as I said, it started in the first week of our study period, and then quite rapidly, after 4 weeks already, we saw the peak of the epidemic in that area, after which it slowly declined again, and with a period of, I think, 5 weeks where there were no cases in August, and then in September, week 18 and 19, there was a small bump again with 2 cases in that month. If we did look at that a bit closer on the different farmers groups, we had, as I said, we had 6 of them. The 2 biggest ones, Kampakasari and Garung 1 on the right, they both had 15 and 21 herds included in those farmers group, and those were also the most heavily affected farmers group. All the herds in Kampakasari were infected, and almost all except 1 herd were infected in Garung 1. Well, in the other 4 farmers groups, less herds were infected, and in one farmers group, Sundajaya, we didn't saw any infection occurring. Part of that is probably because of vaccination. So I've listed here the week in the study when they were vaccinated. So the 4 farmers groups with few infections were vaccinated after 2 months after the outbreak, while Garung 1 and Kampakasari were vaccinated much later. And that's because the government focused on those areas where the infection was not present yet, or only very little. So vaccination was focused on those farmers group where little infections were happening, while in the other 2, in Garung 1 and Kampakasari, infection was already that strong, and many herds were already infected before the vaccine became available, that those farmers groups were vaccinated later on. What we wanted to know, so we saw those differences between those farmers group. So with 2 farmers group having a severe amount of herds infected, while the other farmers group did not. And we wanted to know how is it happening. So we looked at differences regarding transmission. Do we see difference in transmission between the farmers group, and is there an effect of biosecurity vaccination on how the transmission happens, both within and between the groups? So these are just some numbers that we got based on a transmission parameter estimation. So when we look at the two farmers group with the big amount of infection, you see that the transmission parameter is much higher compared to the other farmers group. So whereas in those groups where little infection happened, the transmission parameter was around 0.4, well, it was doubled in Garung 1 and much higher in Kapakasari. We assumed a duration of infection of 3 weeks, and that resulted in some R0s of 4.3 in Kapakasari and 2.5 in Garung 1. And those were also significantly higher than 1, meaning that there were major outbreaks happening in those farmers groups. Well, in the other farmers groups with vaccination applied earlier, we saw a lower R0, but which was still higher than 1, but not significantly higher than 1. So we indeed saw a difference in transmission between those farmers group, and we wanted to know what's been driving that. So we had a look at the effect of biosecurity and vaccination on the between and within farmers group. So if we started having a look at the within farmers group transmission and the effect of vaccination on that, we see that within the group, the average transmission was 1.4. The R0 was on average 1.4 and strongly decreased to a low value, significantly lower than 1. So vaccination was really able to decrease R0 substantially. And the same happened for the between group vaccination. R0 was 0.6 when no vaccination was applied, and was much lower, close to a value of 0 when vaccination was applied. So what we saw with this very small data set, we only had 58 hertz, that the effect of vaccination was really effectively driving R0 down. We didn't saw an effect of biosecurity, and that's probably because most small sample size. I think that's one of the reasons. And the other one is that biosecurity was mostly applied at the group level. So all farms within the farmers group were applying the same biosecurity method at the same time. So we didn't saw a lot of variation on that aspect. So what we saw is that vaccination was applied, but only after 2 months, and so that was the effect in this highly susceptible population of animals. That we saw an early incidence in the high incidence in the early phase of the outbreak, and the fact that we didn't saw an effect of biosecurity, as I said, could be due to the small sample size and the fact that biosecurity was implemented at a group level. And one downside of this study is that we only were able to include dairy farms. I mean, we had our data collection structure in place, but that only focused on dairy farms. The beef farms in the area, we were not able to include that. Time was just simply too short for that. And what we concluded from this relatively small study is that it is an effective way to decrease, that vaccination is an effective way to decrease transmission of foot and mouth disease, both between and within farmers group, and it's a good strategy to control the outbreak. Thank you.
Exactly in time. Perfect. Victoria is the next one. So this is about Uruguay. They are currently for a long time already free with vaccination.
Yeah.
But we also have data on the outbreak. My mouse is doing. The mouse is not doing what you want. Huh? Yeah. Not sure what it. But we're getting there.
To point disease.
to change the slide this. Oops.
Let's see.
Yeah.
This one is the pointer.
Okay. Shall we start? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this symposium. First, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Victoria. I am PhD student of QBE group and BBBR. And my project is about FMD transmission and effective emergency response in Uruguay. These are my supervisors, Bart and Jose from the Netherlands and Andrés Gil from Uruguay. And I also work in the Department of Epidemiology in the Veterinary Services of Uruguay. So an overview of my presentation, I will introduce Uruguay first, the livestock sector. Then we are going to see the FMD regional situation. Then we are going to see the FMD situation in Uruguay. And then we are going to discuss a bit the main challenges towards an FMD free status without vaccination. So let's start. This is Uruguay. It borders with Brazil to the north, to the northeast, and with Argentina to the west. And more than 80% of our territory is dedicated to livestock. And as in Uruguay, we relate everything with soccer. We usually use this that each animal has a pasture space equivalent to soccer fields, and where animals live outdoors and graze freely. I'm going to show you some figures about number of farms and number of animals splitted by species. So we have 39.5 thousand farms that raise cattle with approximately 12 million of heads. Then we have 20,000 of farms that raise sheep with approximately 6 million of animals. There are 3,000 of farms with pigs with 100,000 animals and 400 farms with less than 10,000 goats. And what I wanted to highlight here is that pigs and goats are less relevant either in number of farms and in number of animals. So most of farms in Uruguay are cattle-only farms, the 50%, and 39% are cattle and sheep. And these farms are distributed throughout the country. And what I want to highlight here is that these cattle and sheep are the relevant species for us. If we look at cattle, we can see that 93% of farms are beef and 4% are dairy, and the remaining 3% are a combination of beef production and milk production. The country exports the 75% of its meat production. Livestock is the main export sector. We can see here that approximately represent the 35% of the total exports, the livestock sector. And if we look within livestock sector, we can see that beef is the most important. These are our main destinations. China is the main export destination, followed by the European Union. So let's move to the second part regarding FMD status. So this map shows the status by WOA organization. We can see that most of the territory is free of FMD, with the exception of Venezuela. And in green, in light green, we can see those countries or zones that are free with vaccination. And in dark green, we can see those free without vaccination. And in the map on the right, we have the additional information of transitioning from free with to free without are those zones in orange. So we can see that Uruguay is a free country with vaccination. And in 1996, we were free without vaccination. But in 2000, we experienced an introduction of type O virus that was controlled without vaccination. It was a minor outbreak. And then, unfortunately, in 2001, we experienced a large epidemic. This time was type A. And yeah, we control it after vaccination of the a mass vaccination of the cattle population. And in 2003, we were recognized as a free country with vaccination, and we keep this status until today. Okay, every year the results of the active surveillance demonstrate absence of viral circulation. So I think maybe you are asking yourself why Uruguay still vaccinate, right? And it's a difficult question, and it's good to have today this discussion. But the situation is that farmers don't want to stop vaccination, maybe due to the huge impact, economic and social impact of our last epidemic in 2001. Some more technical in case type A or O, that are those viruses that are included in our vaccine introduction, the spread would be limited. And the other reason could be that we have a good export market access. And this is what I show here in this graph. It's an index that is used by our Institute of Meat. It goes from 0 to 100. If you get 100, it's because you can export to all importing countries. And we can see here that for beef, Uruguay approximately has a 75%, and we call a good export market access. But South American countries are changing their FMD policy to improve their markets, and because we have an hemispheric FMD control program under the coordination of the Pan American Center of FMD, that in Spanish we call PANAFTOSA, and this program in its late stage has aims to eradicate FMD from Venezuela. The transitioning for these free countries with vaccination to free countries without vaccination, or zones, not only countries, and of course to keep the status of free without vaccination. So if we look at the transitioning, there are some technical guidelines that countries need to follow to achieve that. And I will only mention two of them: the cost-benefit analysis and the emergency preparedness in order to reduce the vulnerability. And to start with the cost-benefit, this is what Jonathan Rushton mentioned today. It's a study that was had been performed in 2019, and I'm not going in depth in the results, but I know I brought some conclusions from the authors, and I know vaccination policy for Uruguay is potentially economically profitable for Uruguay. Market access benefits are positive, but fairly modest. And what I wanted to highlight here is that this analysis consider only Uruguay. And as I mentioned before, countries are changing their policies, and yeah, the competition for prices, for access markets can have an impact. So we need to be prepared, and this is the next point, the emergency preparedness. And my PhD project contributes to that. And in our first chapter, we studied the main factors that were associated with infection during the epidemic. Then we studied the movements during the high-risk period, and we learned that we need to identify these highly connected premises that need to be targeted for surveillance and to implement fast control measures during epidemics. And now we are estimating the kernel from the data, and we are going to assess interventions using current livestock data in order to improve the emergency preparedness for Uruguay. So to sum up, we saw the importance that livestock sector is important in Uruguay, and this highlights the importance for Uruguay of being free of FMD. We saw the FMD situation, the situation in Uruguay, and despite the decision of stop vaccination has not been made yet, we took some actions to be prepared. So thank you. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. So maybe the speakers could sit in front and people can ask questions. I mean, not here you don't have to sit there, but so if we're all gathered around, then I can maybe search for some. I will walk with the microphone to make sure that your question is heard. So who has a question? Hey, you're one of the speakers.
No, I think it's very interesting that the situation that you presented from Uruguay. So could you give me some, like, the situation in your neighbor country? Is it still endemic, or you are still free? Yeah, they are free with vaccination, or yeah.
Yeah, most of the territory in South America is free of the disease, with the exception of Venezuela. So our neighbors are Brazil and Argentina. Argentina has a part of its territory free without vaccination, and the other part with vaccination. And Brazil is free and is changing the status. And yeah, it's stopping vaccination.
Yeah, maybe follow this question. I just want to know that, so who supply the vaccine for the farmer? Is government, or did you use the same kind of vaccine for the whole region, or yeah? Because it's very interesting, is because we also have some collaboration in Southeast Asia, but I would say that for our region it's not effective at all. Yeah, so I'm interested on that.
Yeah, the vaccine is provided by the government. Of course, livestock owners pay taxes for it, but they supply the vaccine for all cattle owners.
Jonathan had a question or an answer, I don't know. Maybe push the button. I thought saw a little red light in front. And can you look a bit switched on still? Okay, try it.
Low battery.
No battery. Yeah, I saw a red light flashing. I thought.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Professors are well prepared.
Sorry about that. Just saw it and it over.
We should be back on.
Yeah, yeah. So Victoria, thanks for that presentation. And I remember very distinctly going to Uruguay about 2 years after the 2001 outbreak, and the country felt broken, quite honestly. So the impact of that outbreak was just absolutely enormous, I think, across Uruguay. So let's take this seriously in that sense. But but since then, I think your main market around that time was the European Union or the United States or North America. It's now changed to China, and this is more a reflection. With China becoming more important as a destination, are we also changing attitudes about the importing countries to risk, about the products that they import? So it's something we discussed as a team when we did that analysis, whether China would probably relent and just allow products in that probably wouldn't have taken place into Europe. So are you exploring that in terms of the appetite for risk of the importing countries in terms of your analysis?
Yeah, so is what China is demanding different from Europe? I know that Europe wants deboned meat only, for instance. That's just an addition.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can answer that because I'm not an expert on that and markets. But yeah, we do some like maduration to lower the pH and without bone. But yeah, going back to the first question, China, it's the main export destination for Uruguay, and they ask a lot of. It's not easy to export, but yeah, Uruguay has a good reputation and had good trade partnership, but I think that the thing is that the region is changing, and yeah, with Brazil going to a FMD without vaccination, maybe they start importing more or changes the prices or the conditions or yeah, the protocols. But yeah, they are strict. China is strict when are importing.
No, but for the people online, I can hear you.
Well, let's say complementing with the talk of Henk, do you think also a political, in the last 10 years, the same region has changed a lot geopolitically or politically talking, shift to China instead of a lot of America and Europe. So I don't know if exactly is the reason, but I think it plays a role as well.
So the role of political orientation of countries in South America.
Well, I have not been in South America for a long time, and I will go there next week, so I'll learn a bit more next week, I think. But yeah, that does play a role, and I was just what just went through my head when the discussion went on is about the role of trade and role of vaccination. We are very afraid, for instance, to start vaccinating our chickens for avian influenza because of not even the trade outside of the EU, but the demand within the EU and some countries not allowing, or some retail organizations not allowing vaccinated poultry in the shop because of public perception, which is not a reason that we don't import any beef from Uruguay. So the politics do play an immensely large role. And of course, in our Western societies, we have also situations where outbreaks of diseases are seen by those that do not like animal production as such, as reasons to put animal production in a bad light. So in that sense, we more and more have to be, well, less and less rational about this and prevent outbreaks, well, at high costs even. So, where we tend to be rational in our decision making, and if the overall benefits averaged out over 10 years are higher than the average cost over 10 years, we go for that option. Yet, outbreaks of diseases will be used against you, especially in Western countries where there are strong NGOs that challenge animal production. And so, yeah, we should take that into account in the decision-making frameworks, rather than only being rational about it and looking at cost and benefits in monetary terms. How the discussion starts.
I get my steps.
Just one thing I'm wondering, I think it's not only directed at you, Henk, but more maybe at Jonathan as well. What I see in this discussion all afternoon is actually mostly about rational decisions economically. I've been trained, my PhD was in a medical center, and we were talking about burden of disease there. It hardly went anything about economics. Mostly it was quality of life, those kind of discussions. I saw the Dolly actually on one of the slides very shortly. So how to incorporate the part on animal welfare and quality of life of the animals in this discussion?
That's a very Eurocentric. First, Jonathan, you're from further away.
I'm going to give you an economics answer. It should be reflected in the price of the animals or the products that they produce. And I know that's a poor metric. So if you go and interview people, they'll say they want animal welfare. If you go and see what they buy in the supermarkets, you'll find that they actually don't follow that pattern. They'll actually shop by price. So that could be about a mismarketing of what they're buying, but I suspect it's more about what they want to eat and the price they want to pay for it. And if you go to the UK, the biggest item of correspondence to DEFRA, our Department for Rural Affairs, is on animal welfare, and yet most people still pay by price. So it kind of reflects that market structure does reflect attitudes towards animal welfare, but possibly through a role of ignorance. So there is market failure, I think, in that structure that probably needs to be taken into account. But if you want to have a change of that, then it probably requires legislation. And we have done that to some extent in Europe. So things like stocking densities of poultry, etc., that they are things that we can actually actively engage with. And then there are private standard issues that can be brought in by better labelling and actually following practices through private standard delivery. But I think we're still pretty poor at it. If you take it globally, it's even worse. So I can see that there's various hands going up very quickly. So, but I still believe that price is actually kind of the major driver here. And unfortunately, we value livestock very poorly in most societies now.
Well, now it hits, I guess. We've been doing some thinking, and I totally agree with you. So in our decision-making framework, there's that we weigh the topics that you mentioned: animal welfare, quality, even green, environment, greenhouse gas emissions. If we during an outbreak call health of the animals, well, that's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions additionally per kilogram of products. That's all these types of things. That we're trying to work out a bit on, call it the multiple burden framework. That's how I call it now. It's not published at all, and we start thinking about it, where we look at quality of, well, the welfare of animals, but how to estimate that linked to animal diseases, plus a reduction of life. So there's a concept called welfare adjusted life years, WALY's in good English, but it has never been applied. And well, we're suggesting that to apply that and to link that, where we have look at all these burdens. And there's a public health burden or a potential threat in public health. There's the animal welfare / life years, because if you cull animals halfway their life or their normal productive life, that's also assigned there. There's the environmental aspects, and at the end we should be able to weigh them in. But that's novel, and we should link that